The sun was just beginning, its slow crawl over the horizon, painting the dusty streets of the small frontier town in streaks of gold and orange. The air held the sharp scent of sagebrush and the faint temps of smoke from last night's fires. A lone woman moved with purpose among the scattered stalls of the market, her boots stirring the red dust with every step. Her eyes, dark and steady, scanned the crowd, taking in the traders, the townsfolk, and the occasional stranger passing through. She carried herself with a quiet authority that made people glance twice, a presence that demanded attention without a word. She stopped in front of a peculiar stall near the edge of town. A rough wooden sign hung above it, swinging slightly in the morning breeze. The letters, hand-carved and uneven, spelled out livestock and sundries. The seller was an older man, sun-leathered and wiry, his fingers calloused from years of handling ropes and animals. But it wasn't the horses or cattle that drew her attention. It was the man standing beside the pen, silent and still, his posture rigid yet graceful, his dark eyes watching her with an intensity that made the air feel heavier. The woman leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but unwavering. "I want to buy him," she said to the seller. Words cut through the chatter of the market, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. The seller blinked, momentarily startled, then scratched his graying chin. You want to buy him?" he asked, a mix of disbelief and curiosity in his voice. "Yes," she said simply, her gaze never leaving the man beside the pen. She didn't flinch, didn't waver, and that certainty unsettled the old trader more than he cared to admit. The man beside the pen shifted slightly, his hand brushing the hilt of a knife at his belt, though he made no move to reach for it. His presence was calm, but it carried a quiet warning, a sense that he belonged to no one but himself. The seller swallowed hard, glancing from the woman to the man, then back again. He's not for sale. Not really," he said carefully. "He belongs to no one." "He doesn't," the woman cut him off with a raised hand, her voice firm, a command rather than a request. "I can pay. Name your price." Whispers began to ripple through the market. People stopped their business and stared, curiosity lacing every glance. A woman from the next stall clutched her shawl and murmured to her companion, "Who is she, and why would she want him?" No one had ever seen anyone approach the man with such directness, such boldness. The man himself said nothing. His dark hair fell slightly over his brow, and his eyes, deep as shadows in the morning sun, followed the woman's every movement. There was an unreadable calm in him, a quiet strength that made people hesitate before speaking, before acting. He had wandered these lands long enough to know that freedom was rare, and trust even rarer. Yet now here was a stranger offering him something neither bribe nor threat could sway a choice. The seller looked from the woman to the pen again, weighing his options. "It's not that simple," he muttered. "You can't just take him. There are rules, traditions, matters of respect." He hesitated, then finally added, "If you truly mean it, if your offer is real, I suppose I could." His voice trailed off, uncertainty creeping into his tone. The woman reached into her bag and produced a small pouch. The sound of coins clinking inside caught the attention of everyone nearby. She placed the pouch on the edge of the stall. "Enough?" she asked softly, yet her words carried a weight that made the seller's hands tremble slightly. The man beside the pen tilted his head, his gaze steady but unreadable. There was a tension in the air, a fragile line stretching between them that neither dared to break. The woman didn't flinch. She understood, without needing words, the delicate balance of power and choice at play. Finally, the seller sighed, rubbing his temples as if trying to shake off the memory of decisions made too quickly. "Very well," he said, "he's yours. But remember, you carry responsibility now. Not everything is as it seems out here." The woman nodded, her lips pressing together in a thin line. She did not speak further. She simply moved forward, the morning sun casting long shadows behind her as she approached the pen. The man inside watched her approach, his body tensing ever so slightly, yet his expression remained calm. She reached the gate, and with a practiced motion, opened it. The man stepped forward without hesitation, his movements measured, almost ceremonial. They regarded each other silently for a long moment, a quiet understanding passing between them that neither had spoken aloud. As they walked toward her wagon, the townsfolk whispered in awe and speculation. Who was this woman who could command such attention? Who was the man who seemed untouchable yet now walked freely at her side? And what would this strange alliance mean in a land governed by unwritten codes of power and survival? The journey back to her home began in silence. The wheels of the wagon creaked under the weight of anticipation, and the landscape stretched endlessly around them, wild and untamed. The woman's mind raced with questions and plans, each one layered with uncertainty. She had sought him out with purpose, yet the reality of his presence beside her made the future seem both thrilling and perilous. The man, for his part, did not speak. He observed, he listened, and he watched the world through eyes that had seen too much to be easily impressed. Yet there was a glimmer of curiosity in his gaze, a subtle acknowledgement that perhaps this woman was unlike any he had ever met. She had approached him with respect, not possession, and that alone stirred something long dormant within him. Night fell as they traveled, the sky painted in deep purples and reds. The stars began to blink awake, distant and cold, yet comforting in their constancy. The wind whispered through the canyons, carrying with it the scent of pine and sage, the wildness of the land echoing the uncertainty of their journey. Each mile they traveled bound them together in a fragile alliance, a partnership forged not by force, but by choice. By the time they reached the edge of the woman's property, a quiet tension hung in the air. She turned to the man, her expression softening just enough to hint at the vulnerability she had kept hidden. "This is where it begins," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "But there is much you must understand, much you must decide." He nodded slowly, as if acknowledging a truth he had long known but never faced. His dark eyes met hers, and for a fleeting moment the world seemed suspended between what had been and what might be. The wind carried a chill, rustling the leaves around them, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled, a haunting note that seemed to warn of trials yet to come. The gate creaked open, and they stepped into the yard, the shadows of the house stretching long and uneven across the ground. The woman hesitated for a moment, glancing at the figure beside her. The man stood silent, poised, ready to follow wherever she would lead. And as the door swung open, the air thick with the scent of wood smoke and earth. Neither could deny the unspoken question hanging between them. What would the dawn bring for two strangers bound by choice, standing at the edge of a world both beautiful and unforgiving? And there, at the threshold of uncertainty, the story paused, leaving only the wind and the weight of expectation to answer the questions. Neither had yet dared to speak aloud. The house they stepped into was small, sturdy, built of rough-hewn logs that had weathered many storms. The smoke curled from the chimney in lazy spirals, carrying the smell of pine and burning wood. Inside, the air was warmer, heavy with the scent of herbs and drying laundry, the sounds of creaking floorboards underfoot. The woman moved through the rooms with ease, her hands brushing over the furniture, as if she had lived here for years, though the visitor beside her could see the subtle care in every detail. Each object, each arrangement, spoke of someone who understood both the necessity and the beauty of order in a world often ruled by chaos. The man remained quiet, his eyes sweeping the interior with the same measured attention he had shown in the market. His hand hovered near the hilt of his knife, though he made no move to touch it. It was clear he was not a stranger to caution, to the kind of vigilance that could make the difference between life and death in the wild lands beyond the town. Still, he did not question her guidance. He followed, not out of submission, but out of curiosity, or perhaps out of the silent understanding that she had a plan he did not yet grasp. Once inside the main room, the woman gestured toward a chair. "Sit," she said simply. Her voice carried authority without aggression, the kind that could make even the stubborn and wary pause. He obeyed, the chair creaking under his weight as he lowered himself into it. There was a strange ease in his posture, as if he had learned long ago to carry himself in readiness, but not tension, waiting for whatever the world might throw at him. She moved to a small table and poured 2 cups of coffee, the rich aroma filling the space. She placed 1 cup in front of him. He accepted it with a nod, the warmth of the liquid a small comfort against the lingering chill of the morning. They drank in silence for a few moments. The only sound the gentle hiss of the fire and the occasional wind whispering through the cracks of the house. Finally she spoke. "You may wonder why I brought you here, why I chose to seek you out. There's a reason, though it is not a simple one. The land we live on is harsh, unforgiving. It demands strength, yes, but also trust and knowledge few possess. You have skills, survival, Awareness. Things I need, and things I think you need too, though perhaps you don't yet know it. He tilted his head, studying her face. There was no threat in her words, yet they carried weight like a quiet warning. "And what is it that I need?" he asked, his voice low but steady, carrying a hint of curiosity beneath the calm. She smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. Safety, perhaps. Guidance. The chance to decide your path instead of letting the world decide for you. You've walked alone long enough. There's more than loneliness out there. There is danger, deceit, and sometimes opportunity. That's what brought me to you. He took a slow sip of coffee, letting her words settle. It was rare for him to speak of his past, rarer still for him to acknowledge the possibility of trust. The silence stretched between them, but it was no longer uncomfortable. It held promise, tension, and the faint thrill of uncertainty. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the distant sound of a wagon along the rough path toward the house. She glanced briefly at the window, her expression sharpening as she listened. "They will come," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Questions, rumors, perhaps even danger." He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Who?" he asked, though the answer seemed almost unnecessary. In his experience, danger always came in quiet steps first, then thundered when least expected. "Those who think they own the land, those who think they own people," she replied. "Those who believe a strong hand is the only way to control what they cannot understand. You've seen it before, haven't you? The cruelty of rules that don't bend for justice or sense." He nodded slightly. "I have." The weight of memory pressed against him, a reminder of battles fought, people lost. In the constant fight to remain free in a land that seemed determined to claim everyone in its path. He did not speak of the details. Words were not always needed. The quiet understanding between two people could be louder than any explanation. The woman moved to a small cabinet and retrieved a folded map. She spread it on the table, the creases sharp and worn. "This is the territory," she said, pointing to the rough outline of mountains, rivers, and paths carved into the paper. "It is beautiful, yes, but it is also treacherous. There are those who would take advantage of any weakness, those who would see the land and the people as things to control rather than to live with." He studied the map, tracing a finger along one of the winding trails. "You mean to say someone is coming for you, for me, or for both?" "For both, most likely," she said, "but perhaps for different reasons. I have made enemies, as I'm sure you have. Some are careless, others are patient, all are dangerous. You need to understand that what we are stepping into is not about comfort. It is about survival and choices, and every choice has a consequence." Outside, the sky shifted from the last hues of evening into deep navy, the first stars beginning to glimmer. The wind carried a low whistle, threading through the trees like a ghost of a warning. The man straightened, feeling the old familiar stirrings of vigilance. He had lived through ambushes, betrayals, and moments when hesitation could mean death. He did not fear her, nor did he fear the land, but he felt the weight of what was to come pressing against the edges of the quiet house. The woman noticed his posture. "You ready?" she said softly. "I can see it, but being ready is not enough. The world does not bend for the ready. It tests the prepared and the wary, the patient and the impulsive. It rewards those who understand both their strength and their limits." He didn't respond. Words were rarely useful in the moments before tension became action. Instead, he drained his coffee, set the cup down with deliberate care, and allowed his mind to focus on the smallest details, the creak of a floorboard, the wind brushing against the shutters, the faint sound of hooves in the distance. The house, the woman, the land, they were all part of the same puzzle, and he had learned to read every piece before making a move. She returned to the map, tracing a different path with her finger. "Tomorrow, we begin. There are things you need to see, understand, and perhaps accept.
Yeah.
The land will show you its rules, the people theirs, and there are shadows. People who move through these territories with intentions that are not always clear. We need to be prepared for them." He watched her quietly. There was determination in her movements, a clarity he had seldom seen in those who wielded power. It was not the force of command alone. It was the calm certainty that spoke of knowledge, foresight, and a willingness to bear burdens others could not. It intrigued him, though he would not admit it aloud. Night deepened, settling over the house like a heavy cloak. Shadows pooled in the corners, shifting with the flicker of the fire. The woman moved toward the window, looking out at the endless dark, her expression unreadable. The man stayed at the table, listening, alert to every sound. Somewhere far off, a branch snapped underfoot, the faint crack barely audible over the wind. His hand brushed the knife again, instinctively ready, though he had no target in sight. "You will need to trust," she said finally, turning back to him. "Not blindly, but enough to act without hesitation when the time comes. There will be decisions quick, hard, and unforgiving. We cannot afford delay or doubt, do you understand?" He met her gaze. His eyes were calm, but there was a flicker of recognition, an acknowledgement of the danger and necessity of what lay ahead. "I understand," he said, his voice steady. "But trust is earned, not given, and I will watch, as I always have." She nodded, a faint smile brushing her lips. "Then we begin together, for now rest. Tomorrow will test us, though you do not yet know how." The wind picked up again, rattling the shutters and carrying distant sounds across the land. Somewhere a coyote called, and the echo seemed to warn of unseen movements, of eyes watching from shadowed places. Outside, the world remained wild and unpredictable, full of questions with no easy answers. Inside, two people sat in tense anticipation, aware that the calm of this night was only temporary, a fragile pause before the coming storm. And so, the house held its quiet tension, the fire flickering shadows across the walls as the unknown approached ever closer. The land around them whispered of trials yet to come, of choices that would test courage and resolve, and of secrets that might finally reveal themselves in the harsh light of dawn. Neither spoke again, but both knew that the coming hours would change everything. The journey had begun, and there was no turning back. The morning came quietly, though the wind carried a restless energy, rustling the leaves and sending dust swirling along the paths. Inside the house, the fire had died down to embers, leaving the rooms cool but not cold. The man was awake before the woman, as he often was, sitting at the table with a mug of coffee in hand, eyes scanning the horizon beyond the small windows. There was an instinct in him, a habit born of years of watching and waiting, of knowing that the world offered danger in forms both visible and hidden. Every sound, every flicker of movement in the distance demanded attention. She entered quietly, her own boots soft against the wooden floor. She carried a bundle of papers and a small leather satchel. Her eyes met his for a moment, and there was an unspoken acknowledgement. Both understood that the calm of this morning was deceptive. "You're ready," she said simply, setting the papers down on the table. There was no question in her voice, only certainty. He nodded, taking another sip of coffee. "I want to understand," he said, "not just what you need me for, but why. Yeah. You didn't bring me here by chance." She placed a finger on one of the maps. "There are claims being made, disputes over land and rights, power and influence that stretch farther than most realize. Some come openly, others in the shadows. I have watched them for months, gathering information, learning who can be trusted and who cannot. And you. You have skills that will help me navigate what is coming. You read people, situations, danger. You know how to survive." He leaned back, eyes narrowing. "And yet you trust me enough to bring me here." "Not trust," she said firmly. "Observation, calculated risk. I know what you are capable of, and I know what you will not allow. That is a rare combination in these lands." Outside, the wind shifted again, carrying the distant sound of a wagon rolling over uneven dirt. The man's hand brushed the edge of the table, steadying himself, and for the first time, he spoke of the people he had encountered in these territories. "There are others," he said quietly. "Men who move between towns, who follow trails for reasons only they understand, test newcomers, mark their territory, sometimes without warning. We cannot assume peace will last." The woman nodded, setting the maps and papers aside. She walked to the window, staring out at the empty horizon. "That is why I need you here. Now, not just to guard me or to act when needed, but to anticipate, to see what I cannot. I've learned the land can hide more than just wildlife, people, intentions. Even betrayal can remain unseen until it is too late." The man studied her carefully. He could sense the weight of responsibility she carried, the burden of knowing what might come and yet having to act regardless. He could feel the tension in the air, the sense that the land itself was waiting, holding its breath. It reminded him of nights spent in the canyons, tracking movements under starlight, listening to whispers of the wind that told him more than any human ever could. They spent hours preparing, not with weapons alone, but with plans, contingencies, and observation points. She pointed out hidden trails, places where travelers might approach unseen, and spots where they could observe without being seen. Maps were marked with notes, circles, and lines connecting people, places, and rumors. Each mark carried the potential for insight or danger, and the man traced them with a practiced hand, reading the story behind each line. By afternoon, the tension in the house had grown, not loud or chaotic, but quiet and insistent. There was the distant clatter of hooves, carried by the wind, and every sound seemed amplified in the stillness. They spoke little, but the conversation that remained unspoken was no less powerful. It was the language of readiness, of two people preparing for challenges they both understood but did not yet fully see. She shared stories of those who had tried to claim parts of the land in the past, men who had underestimated the strength of knowledge, the subtle power of observation, and the unexpected resistance of people willing to fight for what they valued. They failed, she said, her voice calm but edged with steel, because they assumed force alone was enough. They did not account for alliances, for strategy, or for the ones who refused to be broken. The man nodded. Some of them are still watching, he said, waiting for a weakness. They move quietly, like shadows in the distance, listening, observing, striking only when they believe the time is right. Yes, she said, folding the maps and setting them carefully aside. And we must not give them the satisfaction. We must anticipate, respond, and remain 2 steps ahead. That is the only way to survive and to control what we can in a world that does not bend to our will. As dusk approached, the house grew darker, the last rays of sunlight slipping through the cracks in the logs. They moved outside to the small yard, observing the territories surrounding them. The man's gaze traveled over the hills and plains, noting the distant trails, the silhouettes of trees and the faint marks left by travelers long gone. He listened to the wind, to the soft murmurs of the earth, seeking patterns and warnings where others might only see silence. The woman joined him, carrying a small bundle of supplies. Tomorrow, she said, we leave for the northern ridge. Are people there who know more than they let on? They can tell us what is happening beyond this valley. Some will be helpful, others dangerous, and some may not want to be seen at all. He studied her face, reading the determination there. And if they are hostile? Then we act, she said simply. But first we watch. Always watch. And remember, not every fight can be won by strength alone. Some require patience, cunning, and timing. That is why you were here, and why I sought you out. There is more to this than what appears, and we cannot afford ignorance. The sky darkened, stars beginning to appear one by one. The wind carried the faint scent of pine and earth, and somewhere far off, a coyote's howl echoed, sharp and lonely. The man felt the familiar stirring of alertness, a readiness sharpened over years in the wild, and he realized that their challenge was not just the people who might oppose them, but the land itself. Every ridge, every hidden path, every shadow could hold a story, a threat, or an opportunity. Inside, they returned to the table, reviewing the maps again. She pointed to different paths, noting which would be safest, which offered advantage, and which might conceal danger. Trust is not given lightly, she said, her gaze steady. It must be earned and tested in actions and decisions. That is why you are here, to observe, to act, to guide when needed, and sometimes to remind me that even those with the best plans can miss the smallest detail. He did not reply immediately, only traced a finger along one of the marked trails, considering the possibilities. There are patterns, he said at last. Movements that repeat, signals that can be read. The people who will test us will leave themselves exposed, in some way, if we know where to look. They always do. She leaned closer, studying the trail he indicated. Then we watch and wait, and when the time comes, we act. But until then, we prepare, and that is all we can do. The hours passed slowly, the quiet tension of anticipation never fully lifting. Outside, the wind shifted again, carrying the distant sound of a wagon rolling along a trail neither of them could yet see. Somewhere in the hills, movement stirred, subtle but deliberate, leaving traces that only those paying attention could detect. The man's eyes followed the path, noting small changes, worn patches in the dirt. A faint glimmer of metal reflecting the last light of day. The woman placed a hand on his shoulder, a small gesture that acknowledged the shared understanding between them. "We are not alone," she said softly, "and the shadows are watching. But so are we. And that may be enough, at least for now." They retreated inside as darkness fell, the house settling around them like a protective shell. The fire was rekindled, casting flickering light across the walls, revealing the maps, papers, and tools that had become instruments of survival and insight. They sat together, not speaking, each lost in thought, each considering the paths ahead, the unseen threats, and the choices that would soon define everything. Outside, the night was alive with subtle sounds, whispers of the land that spoke to those willing to listen. Every rustle of leaves, every distant call of an animal, every wind-blown shadow hinted at possibilities, some dangerous, some revealing, and some yet to be understood. The man felt the tension tighten around them like a coil, a reminder that nothing in this world was truly certain. And so the night stretched on, a quiet vigil of preparation and awareness. Within the small house, two people sat side by side, aware of the challenges that awaited, the enemies that might approach, and the fragile thread that connected their survival to observation, knowledge, and action. Outside, the land waited, indifferent but full of secrets, and the shadows of the unknown crept ever closer, carrying questions that would demand answers soon enough. Night had deepened over the hills and valleys surrounding the small house, and the wind carried a restless urgency, rattling the shutters and sweeping dust along the uneven paths. Inside, the woman and the man remained alert, their quiet preparations stretching into hours of tense observation. Every shadow seemed heavier, every sound amplified, and the faint rustle of leaves outside became more than background noise. It was a signal, a reminder that the world beyond the walls was unpredictable and danger was never far away. She leaned closer to the table, tracing the marked paths on the map with a finger that trembled only slightly. "They are moving faster than I expected," she said softly, her voice barely above the crackle of the fire. "I thought we had more time." He didn't respond immediately, his eyes fixed on the window, scanning the dim outlines of the distant hills. The darkness made shapes unclear, but the patterns were familiar to him, footsteps along certain trails. Breaks in the brush where someone had passed, faint glimmers of reflected light from metal or glass. "They are careful," he said finally, "but no one is perfect. They'll leave marks even if they don't realize it. We will see them soon enough." She exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders evident. "I hope to resolve this quietly, to gather information, to understand intentions before confrontation. But it seems the window for caution is narrowing. We may have to act sooner than expected." Outside, the wind shifted again, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke and the unmistakable sound of hooves striking the hard-packed earth. Both of them froze, instinctively alert. The man's hand brushed the knife at his belt, his muscles coiled like a spring. The woman's eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon through the faint light of the moon. In the distance, the shapes of riders appeared, silhouetted against the hills. They were moving cautiously, deliberately, yet their presence alone sent a ripple of urgency through the still night. "They've found the trail," she whispered, almost to herself. "Or perhaps they've been following it all along." The man rose, moving to the window with careful, silent steps. He studied the figures through the pale moonlight, noting the spacing between riders, the cautious rhythm of their movement, and the faint glint of weapons at their sides. "They are prepared," he said, voice low, controlled, but carrying an unmistakable edge of concern. "It's not reckless. They won't attack without knowledge of what they face. They know something is waiting." She moved beside him, her hand brushing his arm, briefly a silent acknowledgement, not of reassurance, but of shared understanding. "And we are waiting," she said. "We know more than they expect. But that may not be enough." The riders drew closer, their shadows stretching across the rolling terrain. The man could feel the tension in the air, a pull of anticipation, like the wind before a storm. He had faced ambushes before, seen men strike when they believed themselves unseen, but this felt different. There was intent here, calculated patience, and that made it far more dangerous. She turned back to the table, pulling out the maps once more. "If they divide their forces, we can exploit it," she said, tracing lines along the terrain that would give them the advantage. "But if they stick together, it will be more difficult. We cannot assume they will act as expected." He nodded, eyes still on the horizon. "Then we prepare for both. Observation first, action only when necessary, and be ready for misdirection. They may try to lure us into an exposed position." Hours passed, each one stretching longer than the last. The riders moved slowly, carefully, and the woman and the man watched every detail, the sway of the horses, the glint of weapons, the slightest signs of human behavior that hinted at uncertainty or hesitation. The tension built in layers, like the slow tightening of a rope, until every small sound, every shifting shadow, became significant. By midnight, the riders were within a mile of the house. The man's eyes traced every move, calculating, predicting, anticipating. "They are testing us," he said, voice quiet but intense. "They want to see how we respond before committing fully. It is the way of those who strike from a position of caution rather than recklessness." She studied him, noting the calm precision of his assessment. "Then we will not show fear," she said. "We respond, but only when the moment is right. One wrong move could change everything." The wind shifted again, carrying a subtle scent: horses, sweat, leather, and the faint trace of campfires in the distance. The woman's eyes narrowed. "They are coordinating," she said. "Some are ahead, scouting, some follow behind. They are covering the approach from multiple directions. We are outnumbered if it comes to confrontation." He made a low, almost imperceptible sound of acknowledgement. "Then we make the land our advantage. The hills, the paths, the shadows. They will underestimate what they cannot see." Silence fell, the kind that presses against the ears, heavy and full of expectation. The distant clatter of hooves was now joined by subtle breaks of brush, the occasional muted cough, and the faint reflection of lantern light far off the trail. Both of them remained still, breathing measured, muscles coiled, waiting for the first real sign that the situation was moving from observation to confrontation. The woman's hand hovered over a small satchel at her side, her fingers brushing objects that might serve as tools or signals. She did not look at the man, yet he could feel her focus, the intensity of her awareness. "They believe the house is isolated," she said softly, "that we are alone, that no one is watching the approach. That will be their mistake." He allowed a small nod, eyes flicking to the window again. The riders were now close enough that their movements were clear. They were cautious, but the rhythm of their approach betrayed impatience beneath the discipline. Someone among them was leading, someone deciding the pace, probing the defenses without revealing too much. Hours stretched like this, tension thickening with every passing minute. Every gust of wind, every shift of shadow became a potential threat. The man traced lines of thought in his mind, considering possibilities, noting the risks, predicting moves and countermoves. He had never known a night so long, so full of anticipation, where the balance between patience and action could mean survival or disaster. Finally, the first horse broke the line of shadow, entering a clearing with a cautious trot. The man's hand moved to the hilt of his knife, though he did not draw it. The woman's eyes narrowed, and for the first time since the riders had been spotted, she spoke aloud. "They are testing us now," she said. "They want to see how we respond. They have no idea what we know, what we can anticipate. That is our advantage, but it will not last." The clearing filled slowly, the horses' hooves crunching on rocks and dry grass, their riders' silhouettes dark against the faint moonlight.
Ow.
The tension in the air became almost unbearable, a tangible pressure pressing against their chests. Every instinct, every sense, screamed that the moment of confrontation was near, though no action had yet been taken.
Ow.
The man glanced at her briefly. "One misstep," he said quietly, "and it all falls apart. Every plan, every observation, every advantage." She nodded, understanding without words the gravity of his statement. "Then we watch," she said, "and wait. We cannot strike first, not until we are certain we cannot be outmaneuvered. The land and the shadows will give us the answers, but we must remain calm, even as the storm approaches." From the hills, a distant figure moved faster than the others, a shadow breaking from the rest of the group. The man tensed, the familiar surge of anticipation coiling through him like a spring ready to release. The woman's eyes followed the movement, noting the shift in pace, the change in formation. "They are sending a scout," she whispered, "or a messenger. Either way, we must be ready." The hours stretched into early dawn. Sky, once deep indigo, now carried streaks of pale light along the horizon. The riders remained in motion, testing, observing, probing for weaknesses. Inside the house, every small sound, the creak of floorboards, the whisper of wind through cracks, the distant call of a bird waking to morning held significance. Both the man and the woman remained alert, every sense tuned to the approaching climax of tension, every instinct preparing for the inevitable confrontation that could erupt at any moment. The wind carried distant voices, low and careful, a sound that confirmed the scout's approach. The woman's lips pressed into a thin line, her hand hovering near the satchel. The man's fingers brushed the edge of his knife, muscles tense, eyes sharp. Shadows shifted outside, carrying the promise of discovery, the danger of exposure, and the unspoken knowledge that whatever happened next could change everything. The riders' movements grew more deliberate, the patterns of approach aligning with the unseen plans they carried. Every instinct screamed that the time was near, that the calm before the storm was ending. The house, the land, the shadow Zol were now part of a larger story. Struggle of observation, anticipation, and preparation that would soon explode into action. The woman turned to the man, her gaze steady but filled with intensity. "Soon," she said quietly, "everything we've prepared for, every plan we've considered, every warning we've seen, it all leads to what is coming now. Be ready." He nodded, his jaw tight, eyes scanning the darkening outlines of riders approaching. The house seemed smaller now, a fragile refuge surrounded by shadows that whispered of danger, secrecy, and the unknown. The night had carried them here, to the edge of anticipation, to a point where patience and preparation would collide with the forces approaching fast and deliberate. And in the growing light of dawn, the wind shifting and the distant sound of hooves echoing, the tension reached its breaking point. Every plan, every observation, every shadow held meaning. Every decision in the coming moments would matter, yet the resolution remained unseen, hovering just beyond reach, waiting for the moment when action would finally become unavoidable. The first rays of dawn stretched across the horizon, painting the hills and valleys in soft shades of gold and rose. The tension that had gripped the night now hung like a fragile thread, quivering in the cool morning air. Outside, the riders paused at the edge of the clearing, their silhouettes dark against the lightening sky. They had approached cautiously, tested, and observed, only to find no hasty ambush, no reckless trap, just a quiet house and the two figures inside who had anticipated their every move. The woman stepped lightly to the window, her eyes calm yet alert. She studied the riders' movements, noting hesitation and the subtle signs of uncertainty in their formation. "They expected us to be unprepared," she said softly. "They thought the land alone would give them advantage, that we would be caught off guard. But we are here, and we are ready." The man joined her, standing close yet not touching, his eyes sharp, tracing every detail. He had predicted much of this approach, but the skill with which the riders tested the perimeter still earned a quiet respect from him. "They are good," he said, voice low, "but not precise enough. They misread what they cannot see." As the wind rustled through the trees and the horses shifted uneasily, a small figure broke away from the group of riders, a messenger, perhaps, or a scout attempting to gather information.
Ow.
The woman's fingers brushed the edge of the satchel at her side, a subtle signal to the man that the moment of action was approaching. Yet neither moved recklessly. Observation had brought them here. Patience would carry them further. Slowly, deliberately, the scout came closer, unaware that every step was being read and anticipated. The man moved silently to a vantage point near the edge of the yard, hidden yet ready, while the woman positioned herself near the door, prepared for rapid movement if the need arose. Their eyes met briefly, a silent confirmation of understanding. They were ready to confront. It's a challenge, but not to act without precision. The scout reached the clearing and paused, glancing toward the house. He sensed something was amiss. The stillness, the absence of visible movement, the subtle aura of awareness that clung to the property. His hand rested near his side, cautious, and he took a small step forward before stopping again, indecision flickering across his features. It was the woman who broke the silence first. She stepped lightly outside, her stance calm yet commanding, and called out in a steady voice, "You do not need to advance further. We know who you are and what you seek." The scout froze, uncertainty spreading through his body. He glanced back toward the riders, then forward again at the woman. We were sent to investigate," he said finally, hesitation lacing every word. "To see if the stories were true, if you were prepared or dangerous." The man's shadow moved beside her, silent and imposing, and the scout's unease deepened. "Dangerous?" the woman repeated, voice firm. "We are only prepared as anyone should be when others approach with hidden motives. You have tested us, and you have found awareness. That is all. You may return now and tell your people that we are ready, but not reckless. That those who act without understanding will find the land and its people less forgiving than expected." The scout swallowed hard, hesitation still in his stance, but finally nodded. "We understand," he said. Slowly, he turned, signaling to the others, and the riders began to retreat in careful formation. No longer probing, but now watching, reconsidering their approach. Inside, the woman exhaled, a faint smile brushing her lips as the tension began to ease. The man remained near the window, eyes scanning the fading silhouettes, every muscle still alert. "They will think twice," he said quietly, "not just because of what we can do, but because of what we understand. That knowledge, awareness is a weapon they cannot see." She nodded, her gaze steady but thoughtful. "Yes, and it will serve us well. But we must not let confidence grow too fast. The land is full of lessons, and every encounter teaches something new. Today, we have learned that preparation and observation can prevent conflict, but tomorrow may bring a challenge we cannot anticipate so easily." The sun rose higher, filling the house with warm light. Dust particles floated lazily in the air, disturbed only by their movements. Outside, the wind softened, carrying scents of pine and earth, calm after the tension of the night. The man finally relaxed slightly, lowering himself into a chair, though his eyes remained sharp. The woman moved to the table, spreading the maps once more. She traced the paths of the approaching riders and the small scout, noting where caution had been met with observation and where instincts had guided action. "Every shadow has a story," she said softly. "Every movement, every hesitation teaches us something. That knowledge. That is what keeps us safe." The man leaned back, sipping coffee and letting the warmth calm the tension in his shoulders. "And it is not just the land," he said. "It is the people we encounter, the choices we make, the alliances we form. Awareness alone is not enough if the decisions that follow are wrong." She looked at him, understanding his point. "Exactly. That is why we are here together. One alone could act rashly or fail to see the subtle signs. Together, we have the advantage of shared insight, strategy, and respect for the unknown. That balance. That is rare, and it is powerful." They moved about the house, checking provisions, adjusting observations, and discussing the lessons of the night. Though the immediate threat had receded, the memory of approaching riders and the uncertainty of the land remained vivid. They knew that vigilance would be required for every sunrise and every dusk, and that every step forward was measured against the awareness they carried. Outside, the land stretched vast and wild, beautiful yet unforgiving. The ridges, valleys, and hidden paths held potential for both opportunity and danger. The woman and the man stood side by side near the edge of the yard, looking out at the horizon. There was a sense of accomplishment in having faced the unknown and emerged without conflict, yet the quiet understanding lingered. This was not the end. The world beyond the house would continue to test them in ways visible and invisible. The sun climbed higher, warming the red dust and painting long shadows across the terrain. The man finally allowed himself a small exhale, the first sign of relief since the night had begun. "We have gained more than a victory tonight," he said. "We have learned. And that knowledge is more valuable than any confrontation we could have had." The woman nodded, her gaze steady. "Yes, and the trust we have built, the coordination, the ability to act without hesitation when necessary. Those are the foundations for what comes next. The land will continue to challenge us, people will continue to test us, but we are no longer unprepared. That is what matters. They walked back into the house, closing the door behind them. The warmth of the fire and the quiet of the morning filled the space, a small haven in the vast expanse of the land. They moved to the table, reviewing maps and supplies, preparing not for immediate conflict, but for the certainty that the days ahead would demand awareness, patience, and decisiveness. The man looked at her, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them. "We faced the unknown together," he said. "We learned, we observed, and we acted when necessary. That is what will carry us forward." She smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and determination. "Yes, and it is only the beginning. The land, the people, the choices each day brings new lessons. But now we know that together we can face what comes. We can survive and perhaps even thrive in ways that others underestimate." Outside, the wind carried the faint sounds of life-awakening birds calling. It's a distant stream and the gentle rustle of trees in the morning light. The tension of the night had eased, leaving a lingering awareness and respect for the land and its challenges. The riders were gone, their motives checked, their actions anticipated. The moment of crisis had passed, but the vigilance remained, a quiet strength that would serve them in the days to come. The woman and the man moved to the porch, standing side by side. The house behind them was a place of safety, strategy, and shared understanding. The land before them was vast, unpredictable, and full of lessons. The horizon stretched endlessly, a reminder that life on this frontier demanded courage, foresight, and the ability to act with both precision and respect. And as the sun fully rose, casting its light across the ridges and valleys, they stood together, ready for whatever the land would reveal next, confident that knowledge, preparation, and partnership were the keys to facing the unknown. The night had tested them, the unknown had approached, and they had met it not with fear, but with awareness, strategy, and calm. In that quiet morning, the story found its resolution, not in conflict, but in understanding. It's not in force, but in vigilance. It's the woman and the man, strangers bound by choice, had learned that preparation, trust, and observation were stronger than any threat. And though the land remained wild and full of challenges, they had discovered the strength to meet them. Together. The world beyond the house was still unpredictable, but the fear that had hung heavy through the night was replaced with the quiet knowledge that they could face it, one day at a time. And in that knowledge, the dawn held both promise and power, leaving the horizon open for every choice, every challenge, and every lesson yet to come.